Alright, I'm going to do a video of how I prepare to plan or do a custom quilt. I can't talk today, so be patient with me. One of the things I tend to do is I put the back fabric on the long arm, and the client went ahead and washed the fabric. I told her she didn't need to iron it or anything because when I put it on the long arm it stretches, but since I've had it, I've been folding it, looking at it, messing with it, and it had folds and pleats. The fabric was washed and she's a bit wrinkly, which is okay. You can kind of see how the fiber is woken up. Before I start setting her up, I'm gonna iron the back fabric because I don't want issues. Yeah, there you are. So I went ahead and I starched the back fabric and I went with my iron and I ironed section by section. And while I stretch her, I'm going to wet her and I'm going to kind of iron out any fabric imperfections and then get rid of any thread that's back here. Come on, grab it. Roller is employed. So here's my iron. It will stiffen up the fabric and get rid of any folds, and it won't fold when I'm working on it. Like here you could see, well, it was really kind of wrinkled real bad and folded over. If you don't fix this, what ends up happening is when I quilt it, she will have like a weird pleat. So you can see how beautiful and nice and clean that fold is and how crispy it is right there. I already ironed this area. It's still a little bit damp, which is okay. I just want to make sure like I get rid of any like pleat. And here's my needle so I could roll her. Here's the quilt rolled. And while I'm at her, I'm also going to get rid of any thread, lint. And I already ironed this last row. I'm going to go ahead and unroll it, and I'm going to start preparing to put the quilt on top. I wanted to come on here and say, will I do this again? Will I spend 45 minutes ironing and starching back fabric? The answer is yes. Point number one, the fabric, when I unrolled it so I could prepare to put the top on it, it rolled so beautifully on top of itself that it just kind of fell gorgeously. Part number two, that starch stiffened that back fabric so beautifully that it kept its shape throughout all the work. I worked on this quilt for 2 weeks and that back fabric looked crisper and cleaner. Point number three, it's because of that center seam. That center seam was so crisp that when I quilted on top of it, it just looked like a clean, fine line on the back of the quilt. It didn't look out of line or warped or shifted. It just looked gorgeous. Will I do this again? Heck yeah. I learned a lesson. Starching that back fabric is worth every effort. It just felt like the quilt was easier to move around when I rolled it and I unrolled it and I rolled it. So yes, I know you're watching a video of me just ironing and starching a quilt top, but I wanted to share why it was worth the effort. And I'm going to keep doing this from here on out. This is the wool. So you see how this batting looks? It is wool batting. It feels like, honestly, polyester, but it has these different folds from how it was folded in the bag. I was thinking maybe I need to iron this batting, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the quilt on top and iron the quilt, and as I iron the quilt, the batting should flatten. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew a seam all the way across the top, and I'm going to baste all the way around. I usually have a different basting technique, and I'll put the video up here on how I prepare a custom quilt. I want to try something different. Maybe this will work better for me. But I'm gonna just like do a big giant meander all the way around, and I'll show you what I'm doing in a minute. Sewn all the way across, and I've also sewn all the way down. Now you could see where the batting is having some, like you could even see it there. I'm gonna get my iron, I'm gonna wet this area, get my iron, wet it softly. And I didn't sew in this area because I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna baste everything down. What I'm also gonna make sure is that my lines are straight, because I am going to be stitching in the ditch on the outside and on the inside of this quilt. And so before I stitch in the ditch, I wanna make sure that every line can be as straight as it possibly can. So ironing the top kind of flattened all that wrinkling that the batting had. So here, but I also need to straighten that line. I'm also going to baste now. Basting is really slow. Fabric is malleable, and do you see how it could shift from one side to the next? And you could see like this straight row is not straight anymore. What I want to do is lock the quilt down before I start working on it, and also too, if I could see what's going on with the quilt. And do you see how this area right here is shifted? And it's because of this seam, which it's done right. It causes this to happen. This is a good thing to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unbaste this area and iron it nice and flat, and make sure that my blocks are nice and straight. And so I don't want it to bow down like it was. This is why you want to do this. You don't want to be custom quilting like the very top of it, and then when you get to here you find this out. You want to find it out now before you've even started. You can see how beautifully it is kind of in line. I still need to kind of work a little bit over here, but it's nice and basted, and it's not shifting and bowing like it was anymore. And this is what it looks like basted. Usually I was doing like rows across, but I think the basting probably would be better. And I am done with the first part of getting this quilt ready for custom quilting. Will I do this kind of meander basting again? The answer is yes. Reason number one is it locked down the quilt a whole lot better than the way I had it. Before, I have a video where I would baste down, baste across, baste down, baste across. What I noticed is that meandering the basting locked in every area where I wanted it to be locked in. It made my squares be square or rectangles. It made my lines as straight as I could have them. And one drawback is this kind of meander basting takes a long time. It goes so slow. The footage is from my phone, so when I transfer it here it kind of looks weird, but it's just slow process. But whatever, it was worth the time. When you're rolling the quilt, all of a sudden it exposes itself. So this kind of basting gave me the ability to lock the quilt in the place that I wanted it locked. Drawbacks is when you're done quilting the areas that you're going to quilt, you're pulling a whole lot of basting stitches, and there's a whole lot of messy thread. But I felt like I could control the quilt. I basted or unbasted the areas I was working and left the basting stitches where I wasn't, so the quilt stayed put. And all these different efforts that I'm doing on this quilt really made the quilting process more successful, I feel. So I'm gonna keep doing it. It's worth the do. It takes time though, but it's worth the do. Took me 3 hours. So but was it worth it in the long run? The answer is yes. It was well 3 hours spent, because it just made the rest of it a lot more successful. So I love ya. See you on the next one. Bye.